Welcome everybody. How are you doing today? Welcome. It's very nice to have you here. And today I wanted to speak a little bit about our ability to be here. And that means also, of course, about the capacity of the nervous system to be here. We have a 3-week program coming up in July, a program titled Surrender is what we really want. Trust, capacity of the nervous system, and inquiry. And I wanted to go a little deeper into all these elements together in these 3 weeks, into surrender, into trust, into capacity of the nervous system to be here, and also specifically into inquiry, into the skills of the inquiry process that I use. You know, we use several inquiry processes, but this particular one, the one with the question, is it okay? It's such a powerful inquiry, such an inquiry that just cuts through the mind and instantaneously takes us out of that subject-object relationship. It points us very directly towards the cause of suffering, which is the movement away from presence. And once that cause is identified, once we can be here, once we can really zero in on that and be here, that really then results in our ability to come and rest in presence. And of course, a big part of that, when we are speaking about inquiry, this is why this is so crucial, and I speak so often about the capacity of the nervous system to be here, about what does it mean to be here in general. Because this is so key, we can even learn and know the steps of inquiry, and we might even be good at that. However, when past arises, when it affects our physiology, when thought, feeling, sensation, emotions are present, and we don't know quite where to put our attention, or we don't understand, we don't have enough information about the nervous system and brain, we don't know where to put our attention, we end up oftentimes perpetuating suffering rather than really being able to be present here. There's because part of the inquiry process is to narrate the circumstances that are happening, and to be able to remove oneself from those circumstances temporarily, to come back and to really be able to be present to what is actually happening here in a moment. We often say also when we speak, we say, I'm triggered, or I got triggered, or that was triggering, right? What does it really mean to be triggered? What is the meaning of that? What it really means is that there is still energetical content that is present in your experience. And that when certain circumstances arise, inner or outer circumstances, and that when they touch on that content, then that content being unresolved, and that's not a judgment, right? And I'm really wanting for you to be very careful with that, to never judge, because judgment is only going to postpone, right? We're just going to postpone being here. It's not a judgment, but it's a fact, it's an observation that content, that there's something energetically that has not been resolved yet, right? And that's what triggers really are, because then that content that is normally not visible to you, that gets touched by circumstances, inner or outer circumstances. And then it starts to vibrate in a certain way, and it causes that disturbance that we call being triggered, right? It's very fascinating to actually know more about this and understand that with the right practice, we can learn to be present here, right? Otherwise, we are just, going to tumble back into that reactivity. And also, and that's what I was trying to say when I was saying about inquiry removes us from the circumstances. So, when we are triggered, when past is here, the energy so often moves into thinking because there's no capacity in the nervous system to be here. And so when it moves into thinking, then we are trying to fix, change, resolve, figure out the situation out there. If I was different, if the circumstances were different, if that person was different, or if these events were different, right? We are trying to figure out what to do. We are even, sometimes I'm hearing from people, about, we try to examine all our past, right? Rather than realizing that something very particular is needed in that moment, right? And so when we speak about the nervous system and its capacity to be here, the foundation of being able to work with it is to be able to notice sensations just the way they arise here. And of course, easier said than done, but when we do it, that's such a very powerful, very immediate way to both address the nervous system and brain, but also very immediate way, powerful way to come into presence. And also another element, which is both true in inquiry and when we deal just with what we call the triggers. When we speak about presence, we really are focusing on, and we really are speaking about the substratum from which everything arises. And so even here right now, because we don't want to miss any opportunity for that, even here right now as you're sitting here, you can simply shift your attention. Good, beautiful. And you can notice, that substratum, that is already here. And sometimes we are used to, noticing it just with our eyes closed, but by all means, you can notice it with your eyes open, of course. And this is the natural state from which everything arises. So that's what we focus on when we are speaking about presence. However, when, the challenges in the nervous system arise, and when it is not so easy or sometimes really not possible to come and rest in presence, what we need to look at and what we need to speak about, in presence, everything arises in substratum. When it comes to the nervous system, we are looking to separate what arises within from the circumstances that are causing that, or that are the catalyst for that. So a very different way, right? A very different way. Otherwise, there's too much going on the level of the nervous system and brain. Overwhelmed, too much happening, right? No ability to be present here. So I want to make it practical, and because I will be speaking more about this and more, in our upcoming 3-week intensive, but I want to make it very practical. So if we take a situation right now where there is a trigger, or where past is present and you're experiencing a challenge in your ability to be here. And if you remember that situation, and if you very consciously, as the first thing, separate the circumstance that is the catalyst for it, consciously, even envision, even see it, even, mentally see it, it's out there, it's not in here. Separate that circumstance. good, beautiful. Because then you become, as you do that, as you're able to say, you know, that's happening out there, right? That's happening somewhere out there. There's someone out there or something out there. Something is happening there. As you do that, as you are able to create this distance, then you become more able to be here, be present to what has arisen here. That really helps the nervous system and brain to be present to what is here. Make sure your eyes are open. Make sure you're good, beautiful. Notice the sensations in your body. I'm sure you're already noticing a certain slowing down energetically in your experience. Good, beautiful. So just take another moment, right? Notice that slowing down. Because that slowing down, that's now the capacity of the nervous system to be here. Now your nervous system is not any longer in that overwhelm or in that reactivity with the catalyst, you know, with the so-called cause. It's not really the cause, but it just, you know, it just touches what is here already, right? So you're no longer in relationship with that. Now you can actually be present to what is. Good, beautiful. So notice your feet on the ground. Notice the weight of your body where you are sitting. And as you know, things slow down in your experience, which is the growing capacity of your nervous system to be here, then just notice that slowing down. Good, beautiful. And when that really happens, when you find that sense of rest here, then in those situations, it's so much easier to notice presence. So much easier to rest here. So I want to invite you to both practice this on your own, both noticing presence, like we did in the beginning, right? When it's possible to just go directly into that substratum, by all means. And if that's not possible, if there's really the need to address your nervous system and brain, then remember this is one of the ways to address it. And you can practice this, of course, at home as well. And I want to invite you to join me in our upcoming 3-week program where I will speak more about this and we will practice this and other things more as well.